The land of the rising sun is another country in the Far East that is very famous for technological advances, for a mix of old traditions and the new, and how well both can be combined within one nation. But it also has the sad legacy of having had 2 atomic bombs dropped on them to make them surrender and lead to the end of the Second World War. You might have noticed I'm talking about Japan. And Japan is the next stop of our series of what the world can learn from ... And it's actually the neighbor of China across the sea, because they're not kind of combined by land. So in today's episode of Exploring Brain and Mind, we will visit Japan and its wisdom and teachings and mindsets that we in the West could maybe learn from. I actually have no idea where my interest, my curiosity about the Far East comes from, but I know I've had it since I was a kid. First, it was China with the writing systems and all the fancy letters. And I didn't even understand how these writings kind of were created and what they kind of symbolized. And then after my China phase, I came to a Japan phase. So I have a long-standing interest and love and curiosity about the Far Eastern countries. So today we're visiting Japan and Japanese teachings and mindsets and wisdom, and we see what we in the West could pick up from that. But before we step into Japanese philosophies and teachings and mindsets, I want to briefly revisit something from last week to do with China, because I am fascinated by the education systems of both Far Eastern countries. So I start today's episode by a look at the 2 different education systems and how they differ. I'm starting with China so that I can then smoothly move across to Japan. So in last week's episode, we didn't really look at the education system. And I'm generally not necessarily going into education systems of countries that I'm looking at or cultures that I'm looking at, but I decided I include it this time. When we look at the global education systems, especially in East Asia, there's a profound cultural thread that runs through China and Japan. And that is a thread that shapes identity, behavior, work ethic, values, and even mental well-being, at least to some extent. Across East Asia, from China to Japan, education isn't just about academics. It's a cultural expression, a reflection of values and beliefs about what makes a good human, a good citizen, and a good community member. So when it comes to education, China is very much about academic rigor and systemic knowledge. China's education system is grounded in Confucian values. And those values are respect for teachers, discipline, effort over talent, and the belief that knowledge is a moral pursuit. And this produces a system that is defined by systematic knowledge transmission, teacher-led instruction, long hours, and high-stakes testing, especially the Gaokao, one of the most intense examinations in the world. And I'm just thinking back to mental well-being. I don't know how great it is for mental well-being when you're drilled to the core for examination after examination and all the stresses that come with studying. But on the other hand, it can also give us an idea of how and why they get to create what they create and break all these records in different areas. So the underlying message of the education system is that academic success is not the result of innate intelligence, but of relentless effort and self-cultivation. This worldview emphasizes responsibility, hierarchy, and the idea that mastery comes through repetition and discipline. The thing with repetition, I actually totally agree with, because that firms and establishes the connections, the neural connections in the brain required for doing tasks and completing duties. And set concepts of responsibility, hierarchy, and this idea that mastery comes through repetition and discipline is deeply woven into Chinese cultural psychology. And that brings us now to the point where we're moving across to Japan, and I'm starting here with the education system as well. The Japanese education system is about discipline, community, and holistic duty. Japan shares the academic intensity of China, but the purpose of education is subtly different. Where China emphasizes knowledge and achievement, Japan emphasizes responsibility, harmony, and moral development. The creation of a socially attuned, community-minded person. Some of the unique features include cleaning duty. The students clean their classrooms, hallways, and even toilets. No janitors needed. And that's one thing that the Western system could learn from. That maybe teaches the kids a bit more respect and looking after things. Next thing is homerooms. Students stay in one classroom while teachers rotate, fostering strong group bonds. It reminds me a bit of my own school years. We mostly had the same classroom with rotating teachers, but obviously not when it was like chemistry or PE. With chemistry, you needed a room with all the different materials and chemicals in it that were to be explored or talked about. PE, you needed all the equipment for it. Music maybe as well. You want to go into a music room where there's different instruments and things like that. So, but pretty much we had, for many subjects, the same classroom. Next feature is a group responsibility. Discipline is framed around how one's actions affect the collective. And then there's holistic goals. The aim is to cultivate a balanced human being, someone who is diligent, respectful, cooperative, and self-disciplined. And the underlying Japanese lesson is that education is not only about academic success, but about shaping character, humility, and duty to the group. So what does education reveal about cultural mindset? When we compare Chinese and Japanese education systems to those in the West, one clear difference emerges. The West cultivates independent thinkers. I very strongly doubt that nowadays. The Far East cultivates responsible, disciplined contributors to society. Both approaches have strengths and blind spots. But this comparison is powerful because it reveals something deeper about Japan. Its entire worldview, from art to philosophy to daily life, is built on harmony, awareness, intention, collective well-being, and continuous improvement. And that finally brings us to the heart of today's episode. What can the world learn from Japanese teachings, mindsets, and wisdom? The first lot are Japanese teachings linked to wisdom of purpose and progress. And you may or may not have heard of the first one, which is Ikigai, your reason for being. Ikigai is the interaction between what you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what sustains you. It is not about achievement, it's about meaningful alignment. Neuroscientifically, purpose strengthens motivation circuits, supports resilience, and is associated with longevity. Purpose literally keeps the brain healthier for longer. The next one is one that I keep seeing more and more often these days as well, which is Kaizen. Kaizen is continuous improvement. Instead of giant leaps, Kaizen focuses on small daily steps. In behavioral science, this aligns with dopamine-driven reward loops. Small wins build sustainable habits. And Kaizen tells us that consistency beats intensity. And another one is Obaitori. Don't compare yourself to others. Just as cherry, plum, peach, and apricot trees all bloom in their own time, so do we. This teaching encourages self-acceptance and reduces the anxiety and self-judgment that is so common in perfection-driven Western cultures. The next section is about Japanese teachings and wisdom of imperfection and acceptance. The first one of that is Wabi-sabi, beauty in imperfection. This principle teaches that nothing lasts, nothing is finished, and nothing is perfect. Neuroscientifically, acceptance reduces amygdala activation and increases emotional regulation. The brain becomes calmer, more adaptable, and more creative. The next one is kintsugi, the golden repair. Cracks in broken pottery are repaired with gold, making the item more beautiful because it was broken. This reframes our scars, emotional or physical, as part of our value, not a flaw. The next one is shikataganai or shoganai. It cannot be helped. This is the pragmatic acceptance of what is outside of our control, decreasing emotional waste and redirecting energy towards what can be changed. The next section is about Japanese teachings and wisdom of mindfulness and connection. Zen is quite a big thing over in Japan. It's one of the branches of Buddhism there, and Zen principles quiet the default mode network, reducing rumination and increasing calm, clarity, and creativity. Then we've got Shoshin, the beginner's mind. Staying curious keeps the brain flexible and supports lifelong neuroplasticity. Then we have Shinrin Yoku, the forest bathing. Immersion in nature lowers stress hormones, regulates the nervous system, and supports emotional well-being. And then the last one in the section is Hara Hachibu. Eat until 80% full. A simple tradition with profound metabolic and longevity benefits. I'm sure there's a lot more of them, but I leave it for now and move on to what the world could learn from these Japanese teachings, wisdoms, and mindsets. From all these teachings and from the Japanese education system, Western societies can learn to value presence over productivity, even more so now in the digital age where everything is like rush, 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 and one click has to be immediate gratification, or being present, for example, when you go to a concert rather than holding the phone up all the time, concentrating on taking videos of the performance, be present in the moment and enjoy the performance without the flipping phone. Next point is what the West could learn is to build discipline through small, steady actions. That's the best thing for the brain anyway. To find meaning in simplicity, another thing that we seem to have lost. To honor community as much as individuality. Then what we can learn is to see imperfection as part of the journey, which is kind of a bit going towards everybody is different and accepting people that are different for being different. And we can also learn to shape education not only around achievement, but around character and collective responsibility. Japan shows us that well-being is not a destination, it's a practice. And I'm throwing in here again that this may sound odd to the Japanese salaryman, which is the word that they use for describing a worker. Many workers in Japan have to work very long hours, have long commutes, and I'm sure they do encounter mental stresses, mental health issues, which are in their culture maybe not that well looked after. I hope that is something that is improving over there. I should maybe check in with my Japanese friend. I've got someone who was a work colleague of mine years ago. She was working in the Tokyo office. I was in the London office, and she came over and I did the trainings with her in billing and some sales admin things. And we still keep in contact, and I often ask her about the Japanese way of doing things and how things are over there. I always find that insightful and interesting. But all these Japanese teachings, they could, I think, be very well integrated into our own being, into how we do things here in the West. We have to be more open-minded towards, rather than dismissing it as, oh no, that's just them and we know better. This we know better thing really has to stop. This is something that really pees me off sometimes. That's something the Western nations are good at, always thinking that they know best. So to summarize today's explorations, Japanese philosophy invites us into a way of life that balances elegance with practicality, mindfulness with movement, and individuality with community. When we embrace imperfection, slow down, and reconnect with meaning and intention, we open space for the mind to breathe and for the brain to restore its natural rhythm of balance. And that brings us to the end of today's episode of Exploring Brain and Mind. I hope you enjoyed the episode, so you might want to share it with other people who might be interested. Remember to download the episode and to follow and subscribe the Exploring Brain and Mind podcast on Spotify, on Apple, Amazon Music, and on YouTube. Thank you for listening.